Millions seek clarity amid digital chaos. But the most profound blueprints for navigating human life, culture, and leadership weren't written by modern influencers or shifting societal trends. They were recorded thousands of years ago in the pages of the Holy Bible. Welcome to Scroll to Soul. We don't just read the text. We decode the real-world execution strategy for the modern era. If you are ready to stop being a passive observer and start building a life rooted in deep wisdom and intentional action, you are in the right place. You are now among the practitioners. Let's unlock today's blueprint. When we examine the mechanics of large-scale project development, infrastructure construction, and corporate capital raises, we often focus on modern venture capital, crowdfunding, and government grants. We study how contemporary developers pitch institutional investors, secure material supplies, and navigate complex regulatory permits. Yet, the foundational masterclass in project financing, sovereign backing, and resource mobilization was executed thousands of years ago in the Persian Empire. This framework is recorded in the second chapter of Nehemiah, detailing how a high-level professional transitioned from a trusted advisor into a master project developer to rebuild a ruined city. To fully comprehend this model, we must look past the simple narrative and analyze the precise corporate execution. Nehemiah's first major challenge was securing institutional backing and project clearance from the absolute ruler of the Persian superpower, King Artaxerxes. At the start of the chapter, Nehemiah operates as the king's cupbearer. In the ancient Persian court, this was not a simple domestic servant. This was an elite, highly vetted executive position of ultimate trust, acting as a final line of defense against assassination and serving as a close advisor to the sovereign. Nehemiah spent years building relational equity, demonstrating absolute integrity, and proving his value. When he received reports that his ancestral home of Jerusalem lay in complete ruin, the emotional weight broke through his professional composure. While serving the king, his face was visibly sad, which was a dangerous and potentially capital offense in the presence of a Persian monarch. When the king questioned his sadness, Nehemiah experienced intense fear. Yet he recognized this as a high-value window of opportunity. He immediately delivered a calculated, respectful, and highly strategic sovereign pitch. Notice the operational brilliance of Nehemiah's response. He did not lead with a list of demands or complaints. Instead, he framed the problem in a way that resonated with universal human honor, asking why his face should not be sad when the city of his ancestors lay in ruins. When the king asked what he wanted, Nehemiah paused for a silent moment of spiritual alignment, and then delivered a precise, pre-planned business plan. This is where most modern professionals fail in their strategic pitches. They approach leadership or investors with vague problems, but they lack a structured proposal. Nehemiah, however, was prepared with a complete project timeline, a clear definition of the scope, and a detailed list of capital requirements. When the king asked how long his journey would take, Nehemiah gave him a specific, calculated timeline, which was immediately approved. But Nehemiah did not stop with simple permission to travel. He understood that a project without legal clearance and physical resources is dead on arrival. He immediately requested letters of safe passage addressed to the regional governors of the provinces west of the Euphrates River. In modern business, these letters represent essential regulatory permits, transit clearances, and political risk guarantees. Without them, his supply lines would be intercepted and his personnel arrested by hostile regional authorities. Furthermore, he requested a specific letter addressed to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, directing him to supply timber for the gates of the temple fortress, the city walls, and his own residence. This was a direct capital grant for raw materials, ensuring his supply chain was fully funded and secured at the source. Nehemiah did not rely on hope. He secured his legal clearances and his material supply lines before he even set foot on the road. Upon his arrival in Jerusalem, Nehemiah did not immediately call a public press conference, nor did he gather the local nobles to announce his royal mandate. He understood that public hype, before private verification, is a recipe for catastrophic failure. Instead, he remained in Jerusalem for 3 days, quietly resting and observing the local political climate. Then, under the cover of darkness, he arose with a few trusted men to perform a secret, physical audit of the ruins. Riding on a single animal, Nehemiah quietly slipped out of the city through the valley gate and rode along the perimeter, carefully inspecting the broken walls and the charred gates. The destruction was so severe that at certain points the massive piles of burned rubble blocked the path completely, and there was no room for his animal to pass. He was forced to proceed on foot, surveying the structural damage in silence before returning back to the city undetected. During this entire physical survey, none of the local officials, priests, or nobles had any idea where he had gone or what he was planning to do. This undercover audit is a foundational lesson in business due diligence. Most failed projects, bad acquisitions, and collapsed ventures occur because the organizers relied entirely on secondhand reports, speculative pitch decks, or overly optimistic assessments. They fail to physically walk the ground, count the cost, and inspect the rubble of the enterprise they are taking over. Nehemiah knew that he could not rely on the generalized reports he received in Susa. He needed to verify the exact structural condition of the walls, map out the volume of debris that had to be cleared, and identify which stones were still salvageable for the reconstruction. By keeping his audit secret, he protected his project from early political sabotage, prevented the spread of premature panic or skepticism, and gathered accurate, objective data. When you are preparing a major venture, you must quiet the noise, step away from public announcements, and do the quiet, unglamorous work of physical risk assessment before you ask anyone to invest their time or capital. With his objective audit complete and his data fully verified, Nehemiah was finally ready to transition the project from a private vision into a shared, localized capital venture. He gathered the key stakeholders of the region, including the priests, the nobles, the local officials, and the common workers. He presented his pitch with flawless psychological and strategic alignment. He began by directing their attention to the cold, uncomfortable truth of their current reality, stating that they could all see the trouble they were in, with Jerusalem lying in complete ruin and its gates burned with fire. He did not sugarcoat the danger or ignore the obvious systemic failure. Instead, he used the physical rubble as a rallying point, inviting them to rise up and rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that they would no longer have to live in disgrace. He framed the project not as his personal corporate ambition, but as a collective necessity to restore their security, their economic viability, and their shared legacy. But a compelling vision is only the first half of a successful crowdfunding campaign. Stakeholders must also believe in the viability of the project and the execution capability of the leader. To secure their absolute commitment, Nehemiah immediately presented his institutional credentials. He shared with them how the gracious hand of God had been upon him for good, and recounted the exact words of support and resource allocation that King Artaxerxes had spoken to him. By revealing his sovereign letters, his secured timber supply, and his royal military escort, Nehemiah proved to the local leaders that this was not a highly speculative, underfunded pipe dream. He demonstrated that the project had already secured anchor institutional backing and legal clearances. The psychological impact was immediate and powerful. The local leaders did not see a mountain of impossible work. They saw a highly viable, fully backed initiative. They instantly replied with a unified declaration to rise up and build, and they immediately strengthened their hands for the good work. The moment a high-value venture begins to gain momentum and secure capital, it will inevitably attract external opposition, bad actors, and hostile rent-seekers. When Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard that a leader had arrived to seek the welfare of the people, they were deeply displeased. They quickly formed a hostile alliance to disrupt the project, mocking the builders, jeering at their efforts, and publicly accusing them of plotting a rebellion against the king. They tried to use political intimidation and psychological warfare to break the unity of the stakeholders and halt the construction before the foundations could even be laid. This is a standard risk factor in any major capital project or entrepreneurial campaign. There will always be established cartels, threatened competitors, or bitter critics who want to see your venture fail because your progress directly threatens their localized influence. Nehemiah's response to this hostile opposition is an absolute masterclass in strategic boundary setting and equity protection. He did not enter into prolonged negotiations with them, nor did he offer them a minor advisory role or a tiny equity stake in the project to keep the peace. He understood that you cannot negotiate with individuals whose ultimate goal is your systemic destruction. Nehemiah stood before them and declared with absolute clarity that the God of heaven would make the builders prosper, and that as his servants they would arise and rebuild the wall. He then delivered a devastating structural boundary, telling the critics directly that they had no portion, no legal right, and no historic claim in Jerusalem. He completely excluded them from the capital stack, the decision-making table, and the physical territory of the project, protecting his team from toxic interference and keeping their focus entirely on execution. Knowledge without application is just intellectual entertainment. A life of true impact is built entirely through execution. And that brings us to today's practitioner challenge. Look at your own path, your decisions, and your interactions this week. Identify the single biggest area where passive habits are holding you back, and actively apply the exact scriptural framework we unpacked today. Drop a comment below with the word applied once you've put it into action. Let the community know you are executing, not just listening. We are the practitioners. If this blueprint brought high-value perspective to your life, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with someone building a lasting legacy. In our next video, we are diving into another foundational principle. Until then, keep executing.